Welcome to the video lecture on social psychology. One of my favorite questions to ask people is this: if you could be totally invisible for 24 hours and were completely assured that you would not be caught or held accountable for your actions, what would you do? Some of the answers that I get are some that you would probably expect, like rob a bank, play a prank on someone, listen to my ex's conversations, spy on my boss, or travel around the world for free. Social psychology is a scientific study of how one's thoughts and feelings influence their behavior toward others, and how behavior of others influences one's own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Psychologists really like to focus on things like aggression, attitudes, conformity and compliance, and altruism. But mainly we focus on social behavior, like how we interact with people, social influence, how we control people, and social cognition, how we understand people. When someone wants to intentionally hurt someone else, that's called aggression. It can be physical and psychological. Males are more likely to engage in physical aggression, while women are more likely to engage in psychological aggression. But why? This is something that psychologists have been trying to figure out for many, many years. And here's another question for you. If you could intentionally hurt someone and not get caught, would you do it? Sometimes people answer, when I ask the question about doing anything that you want for 24 hours without getting caught, some people say they'd hurt somebody. So many would say yes, but especially if you're in a crowd, because this is how riots and protests happen. This is how soccer fans clear stadiums and beat the brains out of each other, or why celebrations at major sporting events can end up in looting and arrests. If you're not accountable for your actions when you're in a crowd, then people are more likely to do some bad stuff. But we'll talk about a little bit more about that later. One way we explain behavior is looking at attributions by basing on the characteristics of that person or the characteristics of the situation. Many of us are guilty of falling into the fundamental attribution error. And here's an example. I went to Subway to get some lunch, and the person behind the counter was so rude to me. And I immediately thought, well, this lady obviously hates her job and hates people. When in reality, she could have just ran over her dog on the way to work, or somebody could have passed away, her boyfriend left her, got told she was fired. So I made this assumption that she was just really, really rude when something other could have been happening. We may over-attribute someone's behavior to some internal factors. We also study attitudes within social psychology, and everybody's got an attitude, some good, some not so good. An attitude is a tendency to think, feel, or act positively or negatively toward objects in our environment. Attitudes can be formed genetically, so some parts of our attitudes we're born with. Then they are also formed by social learning, classical and operant conditioning, and the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect, the more exposure we have to an object, the more positive our attitude can become. One of my favorite terms in psychology is cognitive dissonance. This is a theory that we want our thoughts, our beliefs, and our attitudes to be in harmony with one another and with our behavior. When there's an inconsistency or a dissonance, we may feel uneasy and be motivated to change something to make them more consistent. Here's an example. Many healthcare providers will sneak out the back door for a smoke break. And they know that there's a risk of cancer. They work in the healthcare field. They know that it can do bad stuff to your body. They know it's wrong, but they do it anyway. So they are probably feeling some dissonance. I feel it when I go to a restaurant. I want to order a double cheeseburger, but I know that my body doesn't want me to order a double cheeseburger. So I have some dissonance and I have to be motivated to change. So I might have a salad. One of the biggest things that psychologists will study in social psych is prejudice and stereotypes, as well as how group behaviors fit into that. When we are prejudiced against something, we have a positive or a negative evaluation of someone else based simply on their group membership. So let's say that old Biff has a membership to some swanky country club. And based on his membership, we may evaluate him negatively as being a snob. We just created a prejudice. Discrimination is the positive or negative behavior. So it's the action based on somebody else's membership to a group. So we don't let Biff join our book club because we think he's a snob. So we have acted towards Biff in a negative way. We make stereotypes as well, which is when we have a belief about an entire group of people, and it can be automatic or even unconscious, and this often leads to prejudice. I love to ask these questions in class because people already know the answer, and they don't even think that they stereotype or are prejudiced against other people. So I will say all blondes are, and someone invariably says dumb. Or women are bad, Somebody always says drivers. He has a fancy sports car, so he must be compensating for, enter whatever there. There are many, many more, but those are just a few of my favorites. And so we all have them. We might not even realize it. One problem is that children can learn these things from their parents. I grew up thinking that all Democrats were evil and were going to ruin the world because that's what my father thought. So when I was old enough to make my own decisions, I don't think that anymore. This can happen with anybody, whether it's religion, it's where you live, your racial or ethnic identity, how much money you make, whether you're male or female or undecided yet. All of these things can influence whether or not we form these stereotypes. There used to be a TV show when I was a kid called Married with Children, and it's a perfect example how TV can influence our stereotypes as well. There was a character named Kelly who was Christina Applegate, and she was considered a dumb blonde. And in the show, she portrayed a completely dumb blonde. So this reinforces that stereotype. Another thing that social psychologists study is interpersonal reaction. So when we are attracted to someone, it can be physically close because we are close to them, because proximity breeds fondness. Anybody ever had a crush on the kid down the street? You're close, physically close. So you could form these attractions. Physical attractiveness is usually the largest factor in attraction. But there's also some level of thought and emotion and behavior that goes into becoming more than just friends. Sternberg developed a triangular theory of love, and he said that we have three basic components: passion, intimacy, and commitment. And there are various combinations of these three types of love, but in order to have the ultimate love, we need to have all of those things. Finally, social psychologists want to see why we conform and why we want to control people. Conformity is a tendency to do what others say, simply because they say we have to do it. Solomon Asch, back in the 50s, created a study where he wanted to see if people would conform their answers to the group consensus. So he showed participants 3 lines that were on a card and asked the participant which line matched a different card. And people would say what they really thought. And then the group who was involved would say the opposite. So what he found was that 75% of the people that he studied gave the wrong answer simply because other people in the group gave that wrong answer. So they didn't want to look stupid. And how many of us have just followed along like good little sheep simply because we didn't want to look out of place? In the 60s, Stanley Milgram wanted to see if we would comply and become obedient. Obedience is the tendency to do what powerful people tell us to do. He created an experiment where a Confederate, or someone who is in on the experiment, was strapped to a chair and had electrodes taped all over him. And the participant, or the person they were going to study, would sit in a different room and administer a memory test. And the person in charge, the authority figure, would tell this person, every time the person in the chair gets an answer wrong, you have to administer a shock, electrical shock. So it went on, and the person, the Confederate who was strapped to the chair, would say, "Get me out of here, I'm having a heart attack, let me out, let me out." And the person administering the shock would say, "I don't want to do this anymore." And the guy in authority would say, "Well, you have to. That's the way the study goes." And they kept on doing it and doing it and doing it. And when you look back over history, you hear these horrible, horrible stories of people who kill other people because their superiors told them to do it. They take no responsibility for it. In Milgram's experiment, 65% of the people who were in the study delivered the maximum voltage of 450 volts. So had that been reality, they would have killed that person 65% of the time. Well, what about helping behaviors? Does anybody help anymore? Well, yeah, they do, and it's called altruism. This is any act that is intended to benefit another person. Well, why do we help people? Why are people just wanting to help? Some of us do it because we think it'll gain us a reward and we will benefit from it. But others do it because other people are watching. So they didn't want to, but somebody's watching them, so they do it. People that don't help in these situations believe somebody else has already tried to help. Back in the 60s, there was a woman named Kitty Genevieve, and she was stabbed outside of her apartment late one night after getting off of work, stabbed over and over again. She was screaming, "Help, help, he's killing me, he's killing me." You could see lights flash on all over the road. All these people stuck their heads out the window to see what was going on. The guy got scared and ran off. So she lay there dying and nobody called police. Nobody did anything because they assumed that somebody else had already helped her out. The guy came back and stabbed her again, killed her, and nobody even offered to help. So she lay there dying and nobody helped. The bystander effect says that the more people that are present during a situation, the less likely anybody is to help. So we do it every day. If you look driving down the road and you look on the side of the road and there's somebody with their hood up or a flat tire, do we stop and help? Probably not, because we assume they've already called for help. Somebody's already helping them. I do it, you do it, everybody does it. We always think somebody else is taking care of them. We diffuse our responsibility. And we just assume. This is especially true with strangers. If you know the group of people that you're with, you're more likely as a whole group to go help. But if you're with a bunch of strangers, you are out of luck. So think about that initial question. If you could do anything you wanted to do and not get caught, would you help somebody? Would you hurt somebody? These are some pretty interesting questions. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation about social psychology. There are entire courses devoted to it, some of my favorite ones, because each topic makes such an impact on every one of us every single day. Maybe this will change your perspective on society and how you interact with others. And maybe it will change your view on what you would do if you could be completely invisible and get away with anything.